Okay, creationism versus evolution. We're looking at the catastrophic flood. A recent creation then would be corroborated by a catastrophic flood. If it certainly came after billions of years of evolution, then we wouldn't see geological strata that showed that. Instead, we would have the flood, what it formed, which is capable of catastrophically, instantly forming fossil records because they're drowning all of these life forms, plant and animal, man, and then covering them up with all kinds of material, some of which instantly form fossils because of the huge pressure of the weight of the water. A mile, 2 miles high of water instantly forms coal, diamonds, fossils. It takes soil and makes granite out of it instantly. And we see that in the record, the fossil record, not according to the textbook. We see variation all over the place. Hardly ever is the textbook corroborated. And you have to do some song and dance to explain all the anomalies if you're a geologist and an evolutionist. Well, let's look at K33. And we're going to look for these words here. A very dramatic illustration is seen. You know, a very dramatic illustration is seen in John Horner's book. These are the words here. He wrote a book called Digging Dinosaurs, 1988. He found thousands of dinosaur bones up in Montana. And he writes in this book, judging from the concentration of bones in various pits, there were 30 million fossil fragments in that area, just that area. At a conservative estimate, we had discovered the tomb of 10,000 dinosaurs. There was a flood, which Horner indicates was what placed the fossils the way he observed them. They're all facing in the right, kind of like a same direction thing, like the flow of water. If they were just kind of scattered about and died over so many thousands of years, they'd be all different configuration. But these were like some water came over. There was no ordinary spring flood from one of the streams in the area, but a catastrophic inundation, he says. Now, he is talking about the Noahic deluge, the worldwide flood. He is a firm, thoroughgoing evolutionist. He surmised that volcanic activity catastrophically killed and buried all those dinosaurs with a local flood, coming along later on to deposit them as he observed them in place today. But when we look at the rock record in this place and other places that he studied, it is obvious that it was a great flood that produced this, not a local one. Too much water would have been required, too high of a height, too much of a height, which would mean that water seeking its own level would cover the whole world. When you find the bones oriented north and south, not every which way, and segregated small from very large, it's obvious that this was done by a large water flow. That's what water does. And when you have it over such a huge area, and you have 10,000 dinosaurs involved in just one place in that area, you have a huge catastrophe worldwide. It's got to be. He continues saying, that's our best explanation. It seems to make the most sense, and on the basis of it, we believe that this was a living, breathing group of dinosaurs destroyed in one catastrophic moment. Why are they all facing the same direction? Volcano doesn't make everybody face in the same direction. You scatter and run every which way. Now, these are his terms, the terms of an evolutionist. And we saw from Dot, this is not the exception, this is the rule. Now they still cringe at thinking it was all done by one giant flood. It's too close to implications that they want to avoid. But when we look at the evidence, we see more and more that it is imperative that we not place these layers of rock millions of years apart. That's part of the implications of the discoveries at Glenrose. Instead of fossils being millions of years apart, we find them together. Notice, for example, the implications of the evidence seen in the Grand Canyon. Here at the bottom, we find the Mojave limestone. Directly above it, we find the Red Wall limestone. The Mojave is the bottom layer of that geologic column, the Cambridge era. Below that, no fossils. Now, 200 million years later, that we find the Mississippian era, we find the Cambrian area on the bottom of the canyon and the geologic column. Then there are a number of intervening eras and hence layers of rock that are supposed to be there according to the evolutionists, but we're told that erosion occurred because they're missing, you have to make up some explanation, throughout the canyon that we go directly then to the layer of red wall limestone, the Mississippian era, skipping almost 200 million years. But when you look at that interface between the two layers of limestone that are supposed to be 200 million years apart, the line between the red and the lighter colored limestone is straight as an arrow and level for hundreds of miles. No disturbances. What happened in between? Wow. Big old huge vacuum cleaner? Now we know what erosion does, even hundreds of years of erosion. It doesn't leave straight and level surfaces. So much the more 200 million years of erosion. But that's not the worst problem. Really. As we examine the edge, we notice the Mojave, the Cambrian, but then a little layer of the red wall, and back to the Mojave, and then to the red wall, and then to the Mojave, and then to the red wall, and then to the Mojave, some 6 times. Wow. Really? How do you skip 200 million years 6 times? No. These are interbedded by water. Now when you learn Steno's axioms, you know that when you find layers that are interbedded, Steno wrote a number of textbooks that really nail it down, and yet he's an evolutionist, that they're not millions of years apart. They are contemporaneous. They had to be laid down together. There is no way to escape that conclusion. The entire column is one great catastrophic event. Oh, I said that word right. And that is the best explanation. It fits the facts. So, Dr. Don Patton goes on in his tape number 3. We're warned by David Raup about this when he says one of the ironies of the creation-evolution debate is that the creationists have accepted the mistaken notion that the fossil record shows a detailed, orderly progression. And they have gone to great lengths to accommodate this fact into their flood geology. Now, David Raup says that he, of course, points out that there is no such thing. And you don't have to have an explanation for a detailed, orderly progression because it does not exist. It's in the textbooks, yeah, nice and orderly, but not in reality. He readily acknowledges that is a mistaken notion, as he tells us. Compare the rest of this quotation from Dr. Patton's notes. A large number of well-trained scientists outside of evolutionary biology and paleontology have unfortunately gotten the idea that the fossil record is far more Darwinian than it is. This probably comes from the oversimplification inevitable in secondary sources, low-level textbooks, semi-popular articles, and so on. Also, there's some wishful thinking involved. In the years after Darwin, his advocates hoped to find some predictable progressions. In general, these have not been found. Yet the optimism has died hard, and some pure fantasy has crept into textbooks. David Raup says, what we see when we look at the fossil record is billions and billions of dead things and rocks laid down all over the world. We're living on a veritable graveyard. Billions of dead things and rocks laid down by water all over the world is eloquent testimony to the fact that there was a great catastrophe. Wow, he admits that. Chicago, University of Chicago, and the Museum of Natural History. Dr. Patton goes on, the millions of fossils that we see in the museums around the world and in the rocks provide convincing proof of creation, certainly evidence that would sustain that concept. Let's begin with a statement made by S.M. Stanley, paleontologist from Johns Hopkins University. He says it's doubtful whether in the absence of fossils, the idea of evolution would represent anything more than an outrageous hypothesis. The fossil record, and only the fossil record, provides direct evidence of major sequential changes in the Earth's biota. Stanley goes on, I hope you'll remember the statement that it's just an outrageous hypothesis, Dr. Patton comments. If you don't have the fossils, I think he's absolutely right, and I think that they, the evolutionists, don't. There is direct evidence for creation that's provided here. If evolution is true, then we should see these simple, slow beginning, gradually increasing in complexity over time. On the other hand, if creation is true, then we should see a sudden and complex beginning in a wide variety of creatures from the start, from the simplest to the most complex. In accordance with how water deposits things, sphericity, density, and shape. If it's a simple, dense shape, it'll be at the bottom. And if it's sphericity. But if it's an amorphous shape, less dense, it'll be deposited later. Let's begin as we look at what the facts are with a statement by Stephen Gould, perhaps the best-known paleontologist in the United States at that time. Writing in his recent book, Wonderful Life, published in '89, he sees that in a geological moment near the beginning of the Cambrian is that bottom layer, the bottom of the geological column where nothing below that has fossils in it, nearly all modern phyla had made their appearance. All. The 500 million subsequent years have produced no new phyla. Wow. So when you get to that point, which is the beginning, an explosion of life, as he calls it in the same article, you have nearly all of the modern main divisions of life forms, from vertebrate to invertebrate, that we have in biology. And they've been no new phyla since then, only twists and turns upon established designs, he says. So we had the basic designs in place in a geological moment, in the beginning of the Cambrian, right at the bottom of the geologic column. Compare another quotation from Stephen Gould. One outstanding fact of the fossil record that many of you may not be aware of, that since the so-called Cambrian explosion of life, all forms, during which essentially all the anatomical designs of modern multicellular life made their first appearance in the fossil record, no new phyla of animals have entered the fossil record. Oh, created all at once. How about an intelligent designer and then deposited it by worldwide flood? Consider the statement made by Preston Cloud and Martin Gleisner, authors of major textbooks in geology, writing, and science. They say, ever since Darwin, the geologically abrupt appearance and rapid diversification of early life have fascinated biologists and students of Earth history alike. He's admitting to it, but not going to change his mind. Its abrupt appearance, its rapid diversification, in other words, many different diverse kinds in the beginning, and in Patton's notes, the remarkably complex forms of animals we see today suddenly appear. This moment, right at the start of the Earth's Cambrian period, marks the evolutionary explosion that filled the seas with the Earth's first complex creatures. This is Genesis material. Gush, one researcher, demonstrates that the large animal phyla of today were present already in the Cambrian, and that they were as distinct from each other as they are today. A menagerie of claimed cousins, sponges, segmented worms, and other invertebrates that would seem vaguely familiar to any scuba diver. Richard Monastersky, as we find many of them already in an advanced state of evolution the very first time they appear. Wow, then they didn't evolve. It is as though they were just planted there without any evolutionary history. Yeah, needless to say, this appearance of sudden planting has delighted creationists, of course. The only alternative explanation of the sudden appearance of so many complex animal types in the Cambrian era is divine creation. Wow. This interval, plus early Cambrian, was the time during which Mesozoic life, more than one cell, diversified into all of the major phyla and most of the invertebrate classes in orders subsequently known. Not only do we have nearly all of the major divisions, but we have nearly all of the smaller divisions of classes and orders right from the early part of the Cambrian, defined by them as the beginning of the major diversification of life. Now, prior to the Cambrian, we have some little green algae and some bacteria. Wow. So, H.S. Ladd, University of California, Davis, put it this way. He said, most paleontologists today give little thought to the fossiliferous rocks older than the Cambrian, thus ignoring the most important missing link of all. Indeed, the missing Precambrian record cannot properly be described as a link, for it is in reality about 9/10 of the chain of life, the first 9/10 of life. Ladd says this, and Patton comments, and his evaluation, 9/10 of the evolution of life is already in place when you get to the Cambrian. Before that, well, according to the evolutionists, the record is missing. That, of course, assumes that there was such. There's no evidence for it. They're both saying that what the creationists would predict, that when you start with you have basically all of the kinds when you start. John Repetsky points out that the oldest land plants now known are from the early Cambrian. Approximately 60 Cambrian spore genera are now on record, representing 6 different groups of vascular plants. More on this next time.